I'm convinced that King Harold was a bad guy. Loki is just the pawn in a wider Elbaf conspiracy, and my job by the end of this video is to convince you of the same. So for a while now, I've been feeling that things at Elbaf aren't quite as they seem, and chapter 1140 more or less confirmed that for me. I feel like I'm almost being lied to, as if at least I'm getting tricked. Things we've been told about Elbaf or since we've arrived at Elbaf just don't quite line up. But because of all of these massive lore reveals, so many hype character introductions, all of these unexpected twists and turns, I think Oda has very cleverly, very successfully kept us from probing too deep into some of these inconsistencies. And let me tell you, there are some serious inconsistencies. So this is my attempt to work out and work through some of these contradictions. I'm going to offer my thoughts on what I really think is going on. And like I said, I'm making it my mission to convince you as well. But before we get into it, please take a quick second and subscribe to the channel. I'd really appreciate your help. I'm trying to get to 100,000 subscribers. Okay, now let's get straight into it. So first of all, here are some of the contradictions I've noticed. It said that the late King Harold wanted peace and diplomacy, but something that I've always found quite strange is that he didn't seem to focus, or he didn't seem to try fix the bigotry that exists within the Elbafians. For someone who wanted peace, he didn't prioritize brokering peace between the different giant races. And I thought that this was even stranger considering that the mother of his own child was of another giant race. For someone who is praised as the great and wise king, the best king in all of Elbaf's history, he let his own lover get tormented. That's the word they use, torment. And we're seriously to believe that this is a man who is principled enough to get into conflict with all the great chieftains throughout Elbaf. He's willing to go through that in order to transform Elbaf's culture away from their warrior heritage, but he wouldn't stand up to the chieftains for the woman who bore his own child. He wouldn't stick to his guns and say, accept her as my queen. And let's even unpack the reason why the Elbafians wouldn't accept her as queen. So as we found out in this arc, Elbafians care a lot about race mixing between giants. They think of it as being dishonorable, as if it's tainting their blood. But the king that they loved so much, their royal ruler himself, was of mixed heritage. King Harold was of mixed giant blood. He wasn't purely Elbafian because it said that he also derived from the ancient giants. Now I guess on one hand, maybe the Elbafians didn't care about race mixing if it was with the ancient giant race. I could see that happening because they're the Elbafians, they're warriors, and ancient giants are the greatest, the biggest, the toughest. I guess it might have even been a source of honor or pride that you are related to the ancient giants. But then hang on a second, now they're trying to distance themselves away from their violent and warring ways anyways? And then also, despite being opposed to tainting their blood with non-Elbafian giant blood, they don't seem to care about race mixing with other species, with other non-giant species. We've seen the Watun, and we've also now seen Colin, the offspring of a giant mother and a human father. And look, Colin does seem to be a bit of an outcast compared to the rest of the giant kids, but it seems to be more because of his personality rather than the fact that he's not purely Elbafian. I mean, after all, there's actually a bit of a human fetish throughout all of Elbaf in general. So where's the logic in caring about your blood purity when it comes to giant races, but not when it comes to other species? Something else that I found really strange is that Elbaf is a land of warriors. They live by a set and structured code on what it means to be a brave warrior. And yet, after their king died, after their king was brutally murdered, and all of their soldiers slain, instead of organizing and holding a funeral or some sort of burial rites to honor the dead, they just left all the dead soldiers to just rot and decompose. These soldiers who supposedly fought honorably trying to protect their king. And what's even more, now, because of this giant graveyard, this seems to have resulted in an almost old wives' tales, some sort of superstitions about the castle being haunted, which I guess actually in one way could fit sort of the very superstitious mindset of the original Vikings in our real world, the very superstitious mindset that existed in the Middle Ages. But then on the other hand, it just doesn't seem to fit that image of the very brave and fearsome warrior. And then now let's take a look at the timeline, because some of the timeline doesn't even make sense. So we know that historically, Elbaf was the warrior kingdom. It was called Warland Elbaf. But supposedly, King Harold one day decided to bring an end to this warring, brutal way of life. Rather than being known for violence, he wanted Elbaf known for peace. He wanted Elbaf to establish trade ties with its neighboring countries, and according to Miss Ripley, King Harold brought an end to this fighting culture 100 years ago. This is when the reform started, 100 years ago. She says that she, as an 80-year-old giant, is the last, or is part of the last generation of warriors. But then if these reforms were introduced 100 years ago, why is this the first time we're hearing of it? How has this news not spread further outside of Elbaf? To the outside world, Elbaf has always been known as the land of warriors. There has been no mention that they've tried to establish peace with its neighbors. No news that the warland is actually now trying to set up trade relations. As far as we know, Elbaf has always retained its reputation as a warrior nation. And sure, let's try to give it the benefit of doubt. Let's say that as a nation that is currently unaffiliated with the world government, news travels slowly. But surely not that slowly, right? I mean, 100 years has passed. Not to mention that during this period, there have been plenty of opportunities where this news could have spread. The greatest example that I can think of is via Mother Carmel. So during this 100-year period, Mother Carmel set up her operations, her orphanage at Elbaf. And knowing what we know about the truth of Mother Carmel's operations, surely if it was known within the kingdom that Elbaf was no longer going to be Warland Elbaf, surely that's something that Mother Carmel would have passed on to the outside world. Surely this is exactly the type of information that she would pass on to the world government. And then let's actually consider what's even changed within Elbaf, because it seems like the culture within Elbaf hasn't changed all that much in the past 100 years. It really seems like it's only now, with the generation of the current kids, this new generation, that they're finally starting to adopt this new way of life. Even Miss Ripley, who seems pretty positive about this reformation in general, she's quite wistful about Elbaf's legendary past. She personally still acts very brutish and very warrior-like, and it actually even seems like she and Scopper made an active decision not to raise Colin in the new way of life. Colin is almost praised and encouraged to still live and behave like a warrior. And look, maybe that's just because of Gaban's influence. You know, he's a very fearsome pirate, the Mountain Eater. But even as a nation, I would actually say that the Elbafians as a whole still seem to embrace very powerful, brave people. They embrace people like Shanks. They still worship and recognize Jarul as a hero. The Elbafians still cheer. Even both the original warrior pirates and the new giant warrior pirates, they're still loved by their community. It's not like the Elbafians look at these men, look at these old generation and consider them history, consider them a past generation whose antics has overstayed its welcome. It still feels like being a warrior is very fundamental at the very core of the Elbafian identity. And look, I get it, when a certain type of culture has been instilled in you for so long, it's not easy to replace overnight, but I do think something doesn't quite add up here, because again, hello, 100 years has passed. 100 years since the reform started, and during that period, the new giant warrior pirates were formed. Why would King Harold even allow that to happen? Why would he allow his own son to start a new pirate crew named the Warrior Pirates? Doesn't that go against the very image, go against the very reputation that he is now trying to move the country away from? Why did he not try to convince his son, why don't you change your name? Why don't you change it to the new giant trading pirates? The new friendly giant giant pirates. Even when we look back 63 years ago, when King Harold was still very much alive, when the whole process of reforming Elbaf was taking place, we can see that kids are actually still being trained in the warrior way. Why not decree that all kids from now on will go to school and stop learning how to become warriors? Was it really such a slow process? Was King Harold really that afraid of the backlash that all he tried was to employ soft power when he was making these reforms? To me, it doesn't really make sense, but let's look at another timeline inconsistency. So we now know that King Harold was killed 14 years ago, which then starts to raise, when did Lola's betrothal, when did Loki and Lola's engagement take place amidst all of this? Because we don't know when exactly Loki proposed to Lola, but I would have thought that this incident, this engagement, happened a lot more recently than 14 years ago. I mean, think about it, Lola is only 26 years old. Surely she would have been older than 12 when Loki proposed. Especially because we also saw Lola's farewell to Pudding before she escaped, before she left and ran away. And Pudding is only 16 years old now, so if it happened before King Harold's death, that means that at the oldest, Pudding would have only been 2 when Lola left. And come on, look at this flashback. There is no way that that's a 2-year-old Pudding. So then before you go and say, well, the engagement could have always happened after Loki killed his father and ran away. It happened after Loki became a pirate and started to sail the seas. Well, I'd have to beg to differ, because we were explicitly told that by Lola breaking off the engagement, and because Big Mom tried to trick the Elbafians and pass on Chiffon as Lola, this is what made the Elbafians even angrier at Big Mom. And let's actually take a look at the specific language used here, shall we? Chiffon says, they realized that I wasn't Lola, and things got even worse with giants. Not just that Loki realized that she wasn't Lola, but they, collectively, the Elbafians. This whole dialogue, this whole passage feels very much as if the entire kingdom was very involved, very invested in this engagement. That the outcome, Big Mom's treachery, this angered the Elbafians as a nation, as a kingdom. And I just don't think that that would quite make sense if the Elbafians didn't really care about Loki anymore. Why would they be so enraged on his behalf? Why would they have been willing to make peace with Big Mom for Loki's sake when they don't even like or respect Loki anymore? When they don't really recognize him as a true prince? I guess the one caveat could be that this was the Elbafians' own political ploy. Maybe they were trying to use this engagement to try capture Loki. But I have to say, I don't know, I feel like that's a little too convoluted, and the Elbafians don't quite strike me as the political masterminds who would try to come up with plans and schemes like this. And the other alternative that I could think of is that when Chiffon is saying they, maybe she's not referring to the Elbafians as a whole, and maybe she's only referring to Loki and Loki's pirate crew. Maybe they turned against Big Mom even more on behalf of their captain. But we don't even actually know whether Loki had a proper pirate crew. Anyways, all of this is just to say that there is something seriously afoot here at Elbaf. Things aren't making sense. Someone is lying. And you can let me know if you think I'm reading way too deep into things. But I'm very sure that I'm not the only one who is suspecting there is a conspiracy going on. So then based on these inconsistencies, here are some of my thoughts. I'm now convinced of 3 things. 1. Loki is not a bad guy. He's being used as a pawn in someone else's game. 2. King Harold was not the model Elbafian king as he's claimed to be. I think King Harold was actually working with the world government. And 3, these first 2 premises. These are currently coming to a head at Elbaf, and this is what's going to drive us into the Ragnarok, into the final war, the great war, the climax of the series. So let's start with this first idea. Now, if you've been around this channel for a while now, you'll know that I have long been saying Loki is not a bad guy. He's not evil like he's being painted out to be. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then I'll link those videos. But basically, I think what we knew about Loki from even before the Elbaf arc, the fact that he was this romantic, the fact that he truly cared for Lola, I think it was clear that he wasn't wasn't such a bad guy. And then ever since meeting him at Elbaf, I think the more we see, the more we get to realize he's really not all that bad. We've seen Loki display kindness to Shaggy or to Mosa, depending on which translation you're reading. We also see that he actually truly cares about his friends in the underworld. He's rejected becoming one of the gods' knights and becoming a celestial dragon. He calls the celestial dragons scum. And knowing what we know about the celestial dragons, I think we can get very much on board with that. And can I just say that Loki turning out to be not evil is actually just so classic One Piece. We've seen this happen time and time again. We saw it happen with Robin, the demon child, actually turning out to be just the victim of the Oharan incident. We also saw it even more recently with Kuma the tyrant, who is not actually a tyrant at all. So Loki, the accursed prince who's going to bring about the doom of Elbaf? Yeah, I don't think so. Or at least it's not that simple. Yes, he's violent and he wants to destroy the world. He's said that multiple times. But destroying the world, as we know, is not such a bad thing. We're wanting the world to be destroyed. We want this current world to be destroyed so that a fairer world can exist. A fairer world can be established. That's exactly what we're waiting for Luffy to do. To destroy this current world, destroy its current world systems, the world government, and we want Luffy to bring about the new dawn. So that's the first part, right? Loki isn't evil. Instead, he's being used as a pawn by both sides to bring about the Ragnarok. And when I say both sides, I'm referring to the world government and the Roger Pirates. So let's start with the world government. Or rather, it's the world government and his own father, the late King Harold. If Loki is the perfect example of yet another good character who has been initially portrayed as being evil, then King Harold is the exact opposite. Now, I've already listed some things about King Harold that doesn't quite line up, some things that makes King Harold a little suspect. But chapter 1140 is what really nailed the coffin for me. In chapter 1140, the God's Knights spoke as if they are already familiar with King Harold. They ask, why are we here in Elbaf? Are we here to visit King Harold's tomb? And that to me sounds really strange because visiting someone's gravesite, that sounds like a show of respect. In fact, the only instances we've seen this happen in the series are when characters go to the gravesites of their friends or of people that they've respected in the past. We've seen this with Shanks. We've seen this with Sabo. We've seen this with Yukimaru, protecting the gravesites of his loved one. All these cases, there's this pre-existing connection, a relationship of friendship or a relationship of respect. But even before chapter 1140, I think there have been little hints. So one of the most major reveals in the Elbaf arc has been our introduction to Shanks' evil twin brother, Figureland Shamrock. And I have to say, initially, I thought that the God's Knight's intervention at Elbaf, their attempt to try and recruit Loki, was a result of the Supreme Commander, Figureland Garling, being promoted to Gorosei, thereby leaving a gap within the God's Knights that they had to fill. But then I went back and I reread all of Elbaf and even the ending of the Egghead Island arc, and I actually realized that the plan to infiltrate Elbaf has been in stone, has been set in place for a while now. In chapter 1125, when the Vice Admirals suggest that they go after the Straw Hats to Elbaf, Saint Saturn, may he not rest in peace, he tells the Vice Admirals, don't bother. Says, don't bother, don't go chasing the crew. And back then, I thought Saturn said that because he just considered the Elbafian giants too strong. He thought, after they've already lost at Egghead, they would be expending too much energy, too much risk in going after the Straw Hats and the giants. Whereas now I think the reason why Saint Saturn told them don't bother is because he knew that there was already a plan in motion to go infiltrate and to go bring Elbaf under the power of the world government. So he really figured there was no need. And then this seems to be supported in chapter 1136. Because in chapter 1136, we see a conversation between Shamrock and Gunko. And according to Gunko, it seems that the God's Knights had already sent out agents to go spy on Elbaf and report information back to them. Which again seems to confirm or at least suggest this idea that this plan has been in place for a while now. Likely even before the giant warriors came to save Luffy at Egghead, even before Saturn was killed and Garling replaced him as one of the Gorosei. say. And at first I wondered, did the God's Knights just kill Harald themselves and then frame Loki for the murder? Did they know that leaving Elbaf without a leader would cause some instability, make it easier for them to infiltrate? And look, I won't rule that out completely, but the more that I think about it and the more I think about King Harald's strangeness, his little suspicious activities, I am now more inclined to say King Harald himself was in on the plan. King Harald was working with the world government. King Harald was trying to bring Elbaf under world government control, or world government affiliation. But of course, with the rich history of Elbaf, as a strong warrior nation, a nation that has deep ties to the lore that concerns the world, with their partial knowledge of what happened in the previous eras, he knew that it wouldn't be so easy to weaken the spirit of the warriors. He knew it wouldn't be easy to convince them, hey, we should become affiliated with the world government. So what does he do instead? He starts his reformation to distance Elbaf from its warrior past. He wants to strip Elbaf of its true culture. Now, why King Harald wanted to do this, I have a couple of ideas. The most straightforward, the easiest ones, is that he made a deal, maybe like York. Maybe King Harald wanted to become one of the celestial dragons himself. Maybe he wanted to become immortal like the Gorosei. Or maybe this was his own way of getting revenge on the Elbafians who scorned his lover after the torment that Haraldun's mother endured. Maybe King Harald decided Elbaf isn't a noble country that deserves saving or protection. They deserve punishment instead. Maybe he thought stripping them of their warrior ways would make them more likely to accept her as his queen. Or maybe this was just simply King Harald's own twisted interpretation of the Harley. Maybe he genuinely believed that he was doing the right thing by bringing Elbaf under world government affiliation. I mean, after all, JoyGirl does actually say that perhaps both Loki and King Harald were both living out their own interpretations of what Nika represent. Either way, I think this way, we can recontextualize everything we thought we knew about Loki and what we thought we knew about King Harald. When it comes to the patricide, yes, I do believe that Loki did in fact kill his own father, but he did so not out of greed or unfettered ambition. Loki just must have caught on to what his father was doing and challenged him. That must be the reason why Oda showed us the transportation portal right on the castle floor, to show us that the God's Knights, the world government, has been in frequent contact with the royal kingdom. Perhaps one day Loki came into the castle, found the God's Knights dealing with his father. In which case, unwilling to let Elbaf fall into the hands of the world government, unwilling to let his own father betray their kingdom, Loki engages King Harald in battle. Lord JoyGirl gets involved, unaware of the bigger picture, just thinks Loki is out here attacking his king. So JoyGirl gets involved, tries to protect his king, and just as Loki is about to reveal his father's dark, sinister plan, King Harald stabs JoyGirl. The reason I say this is because come look at this portrait of King Harald. Focus particularly on his sword. Look at that curved hilt of the sword. Look at the shape. Now look at the sword that's lodged in Lord JoyGirl's head. Try and tell me that these two are not the same swords. In which case, then why does JoyGirl blame Loki for what happened to his head? Well, seeing as the sword has been stabbed into JoyGirl's head, it's possible that he could have some sort of partial memory loss. Or maybe because it was a wild, chaotic battle, it was a confusing scuffle, it seemed like Loki stabbed JoyGirl even though it was actually King Harald. Or maybe King Harald was actually trying to stab Loki, but JoyGirl got in the way, and JoyGirl, not wanting to complicate things further, just said this was Loki because he saw Loki as the instigator of the entire battle. But again, the whole thing is just a great big misunderstanding. In fact, I think it's even possible that everything Loki has been blamed for throughout his life has been the event or has been the result of big misunderstandings. Isn't it interesting that they say that whenever King Harald was away, Loki made the Elbafians' lives a living hell. It seems that bad things happened when King Harald was away. And initially it seems to mean that that's because that's when Loki would act up, that's when he would misbehave. But it's even possible that actually what King Harald was doing was going away and plotting things, doing things in the shadows, in the dark, to try and sabotage Elbaf. But it was Loki that was being blamed for what was happening. Ever since we were introduced to Loki's so-called dangerous dangerous nature, I really couldn't help but feel that this was so Odin-esque. And just as Odin was misunderstood by the citizens of Wano that he was protecting from the shadows in secret, I just feel like we're getting a very similar situation with Loki. Anyways, once Loki killed King Harold, the world government's plans fell apart. Until recently, they tried to change the tactic, tried to get Loki on their side instead. I mean, it worked for his father, so why not try with the son? But obviously, as we've seen, unfortunately for them, it didn't work out too well. Whereas on the other side that's using Loki as a pawn, I have a feeling they're going to be more successful. So let's look at this other side, shall we? The second group, the Roger Pirates. Well, actually, more specifically, it's Skopagaban and Shanks. So I think these two ex-Roger Pirates are in cahoots, and that these two have always planned to let Loki go, to release Loki once Luffy came along. Because the Roger Pirates knew the truth about the world, understand the lore, the history, I think they also know that Loki is a core part of what's to come. They know that Loki is the key to the Ragnarok. Ironically, Luffy just fought Scopper for the key to free Loki, whereas actually, Loki is the key to the Great War. He's the key to the Ragnarok that's going to subsequently bring about a new dawn. Thought that was cute. But they also know that Loki's power is one that has to be harnessed correctly. Left on his own, left to his own devices, Loki is too much of a wild card. He's just going to wreak needless havoc. He's just going to destroy the world without proper guidance, without proper focus. If we go back to the Elbafians' interpretations of the Harley and of Nika, Loki is part of those giants that focuses too much on Nika the Destroyer. He doesn't see the bigger picture. Whereas Scopper and Shanks obviously know that Luffy and his new awakened Nika form, he will be the one to properly guide and harness Loki. And that's the reason why Shanks locked up Loki 6 years ago. Despite knowing that Loki wasn't necessarily to blame for killing King Harold, Shanks also knew that it wasn't time for Loki to be going around destroying the world yet. 6 years ago, that was even before Luffy started his journey. In a very similar way, that's the whole point behind Scopper's very recent, very brief clash against Luffy. Apart from Oda just wanting to tease fans with a little brief clash, really what Scopper was doing is he just wanted to test Luffy, and he wanted to confirm with his own eyes that Luffy could be, that he would be the one to harness Loki. Because after first guarding the key, and after warning Luffy that no, you don't want to free Loki, as soon as Scopper sees Luffy's Nika form, he's assured that Luffy is the promised one, the prophesized one, the one that Roger is waiting for, the one that the Roger Pirates were too early for. And we have seen throughout the series that the ex-Roger Pirates, the remnants of the Roger Pirates, have been very strategically placing themselves throughout the world to guide the one that will one day flip the world upside down. Shanks initially went out going to look for that very person. Crocus waits and sits at Reverse Mountain to welcome the one who is going to enter the Grand Line. Rayleigh waits at the bridge between Paradise and the New World, making sure that the one is ready. And here now, Scopper at Elbaf, another very critical juncture, a land that holds so much of the secrets behind the world's lore, and most importantly, the key to the one who's going to bring about the doom. Scopper stayed here at Elbaf to guard Loki until that right moment. And that right moment has finally come. Luffy, the returned Nika, he's finally arrived to use the key and turn the world upside down. And that basically is my idea of what's going on at Elbaf. But as always, please let me know what you think by leaving a comment below. Let me know, do you agree? Do you disagree? Have I missed anything? If I have successfully convinced you, then please make sure to subscribe. Or even if I haven't, please subscribe to just help out a fellow One Piece fan. You can also show support by liking and sharing the video, or you can even become a Patreon or channel member like these wonderful people to help me out further. But as always, I appreciate you guys so much for just listening and tuning into our discussions. This is JoyGirl, and I'll see you again soon.